Well, hello. This screencast is about the language that you use for critical writing. So we're going to be looking at linking words, which are useful for critical writing. Linking words allow you to show relationships between ideas in sentences. And we're going to look at the words which show the writer's attitude towards his opinions. Now, a writer can have a very bold view about something or a very cautious or tentative view. And we're going to look at some examples of sentences in this essay that show whether the writer feels very convinced about what he's writing or a bit cautious about it. First of all, let's look at the linking words which allow you to show relationships between ideas in your writing. The first one we're going to look at is concession. The words that commonly indicate concession in writing are although, while, whilst, and despite. Now, while and whilst are very, very similar. It doesn't particularly matter how you spell it, whether it's while or whilst. Now, concession means that although you agree that one thing is true, you accept that one thing is true, but you want to also notice that a second thing, which is more important, is true as well. If we look at this example in red below, although the number of people living in poverty has been gradually declining, yes, this is true. The author admits it's true the number of people has been declining. There's a second thing which is also true to consider. 17% of people in the developing world still lived at or below $1.25 per day in 2011. So that is also true and actually more important than the fact that the number of people living in poverty has been declining. So this is something we need to address, the fact that there are still 70% of people in the world living on the poverty line. Now, we can do this concession by using although, while, whilst and despite, as I've already told you, but you do have to remember that there's a slightly different grammatical construction coming after despite compared to although, while and whilst. With although, while and whilst, you've got dependent clause plus independent clause following those words. With despite, you must follow with a noun phrase plus independent clause, and I'm going to show you that on the next slide. So, despite the level of success, and notice after despite we've got a noun phrase, this level of success. Then we have a new sentence, an independent clause. The model has been criticised by Western governments. So we know that the writer thinks that the model has been criticised by Western governments and writers is more important and overrides the fact that it has had some success. If we look at the next one, whilst it is too early in the process to draw definitive conclusions, yes, that's true. It's also true that it seems that the development of this zone has allowed for greater economic growth. So it's more important to think that, yes, it's early, but it seems that there's been a lot of growth. And the third one, yes, it's true, these donations are laudable. Laudable means praiseworthy, valuable and important. Although they're valuable and important, we must consider that their level of success is now being challenged. This is also true, and in fact, the writer wants to explore that, challenging the level of success of these donations. So those words are really, really important to allow you to admit that something's true, but then overcome it by saying something else, which I think is more important, is also true. And that allows analysis, it allows evaluation as well. Let's look at cause-effect. We've got the word effect in there. The Western aid programme began in the 1950s and has had little long-term effect. Why has it had little effect? What's the cause? Largely due to the lack of structural change. So exploring this attention to detail, the writer's been able to use cause-effect relationships to analyse the problems with the Western aid programme. Reason-result, very similar to cause and effect. Authors argue that the impact is likely to rise. That's a result as Chinese investment levels have accelerated. That as there means because. The impact is likely to rise because Chinese investment levels have accelerated since the start of the crisis. So there we've got an example of analysing and giving reasons and giving results, suggesting other possibilities as an alternative approach. Now that as, we've already seen as meaning because. Here we've got the word as meaning in accordance with or in line with. As an alternative approach, China has adopted a policy of. So a way of suggesting other possibilities. A good way of linking back to the previous sentence. Showing a contrast. Two ways that are shown in these examples. Nevertheless, other writers point out that Chinese competition can lead to newer, stronger local companies, or in contrast, the diversion of Western aid has been well documented. So that's showing a contrast to the previous idea. Now the writer could have also said however there, but in fact there weren't any examples that I could use in the text of that. I only found nevertheless and in contrast. Showing how two things correlate. Now correlate means what's the relationship, what's the link between two things. So as more recent data becomes available, we've got the word as again here, and here it means during the time that. So during the time that more recent data becomes available, the impact is likely to rise. So these two things will happen together. You'll get more recent data and the impact will probably rise. Really important to give examples when you're writing critically, because examples give extra detail about what you're writing about. They give evidence and they give detail. China is now exporting this model to a proposed 19 sites across the developing world. For example, very common to use full stop, for example, at the beginning of a sentence. Or the other possibility, other writers point out that Chinese competition can lead to new, stronger local companies being created, as has happened in the shoe industry in Ethiopia. Here we've got the word as again, meaning in the way that it has happened. So another way of introducing an example. Finally, we're going to change topic slightly. It's very interesting in this assignment to see how the writer's attitude is displayed towards what he's writing, towards his opinions. So he's got an opinion. Does he hold that opinion strongly, or does he hold it tentatively? Tentative means cautious. Is he cautious about his opinion, or is he tentative? Now the strong opinions that I've found in this assignment are written in red, and the cautious or tentative ones are written in purple. The Chinese government rightly point to the evidence that African citizens will gain employment. The SEZ model has been used extremely successfully. They show that the writer is convinced about his opinion, that he really believes he is right. If you compare that to the purple sentences, the policy seems to be a policy worth pursuing. Not is a policy worth pursuing, but seems to be cautious. Bräutigam suggests that the Chinese are focusing their aid. Bräutigam is not necessarily convinced about what he believes. Brooks and Shin claim that. That claim is tentative. That means that the writer does not actually necessarily believe that Brooks and Shin are right. The authors argue that as more recent data becomes available, the impact is likely to rise. Here the writer is saying that the authors are not convinced that the impact will rise. Just it will probably rise, but they're not sure. The next sentence, the writer is saying this may allow Africa to grow economically. Not it will allow Africa to grow economically, which is a very strong possibility, but this may allow, it's a bit of a 50-50 possibility. Perhaps it will allow Africa to grow, perhaps it will not. The Western aid programme appears to have had little long-term effect. The writer is saying here, I'm not quite sure, it seems that, but I'm not 100% convinced that it's had little long-term effect. Now, by using this vocabulary very accurately, the writer can make his views very strong or actually more cautious. Being able to adjust the strength of your belief is very important in academic writing, and that's something that you need to start noticing when you are reading and when you're writing your own assignments.